as a judge, the last almost 10 years of that as the first justice of Suffolk. I retired because it's mandatory for us to retire at the
There's no way, there's no way.
old age of 70. I'm not going to ask anyone here how old you are, but the rightful age of 70, they make us retire. I want to tell you a little bit about Audrey. I did send you all a letter. I'm not going to go through everything in the letter. I'm just going to highlight the parts that I think brings us here today to watch this exceptional woman rise to the bench, that you were to all vote positive for her. I watched Audrey in the courtroom from 2008 to 2020, roughly about 12 years, in the criminal session. In Boston Juvenile Court, we've got one of the busiest juvenile sessions. We also have sessions in Dorchester, West Roxbury, and Chelsea. So she was a busy young woman. She appeared in all of our sessions. I saw her handle delinquent cases. She's also YO certified, which means she's handling the highest level of felony that juvenile courts have jurisdiction over, and we have the broadest sentencing powers. So an attorney who's representing youthful offenders has got to work within that interesting and combination sentences that juvenile judges can give. We can sentence a 14-year-old to state prison if they are found delinquent youthful offender. It is a heavy load to carry as a judge. She's going to be capable of making that tough decision. She's got the courage to do that. She also has the courage on the civil side to be able to either return children if the department has not proved their case, and by the department, I mean the Department of Children and Families, or she will be able to remove children and terminate parental rights of those parents that deserve to have them. I know from knowing Audrey Murillo that she will always, on the civil side, on those care and protections and the CRAs, have the best interest of the child at heart. That she will listen to the facts, she will calmly and respectfully listen to everyone in the courtroom. She will also calmly and deliberately make a decision. She also has, and this is important for you to hear, we need judges in the juvenile court of a certain maturity age, and I have made this my point with the JNC. You need the life experience to be able to go on the bench and be able to handle what happens, not only in the courtroom, but also handling the complex fact patterns that you'll have thrown at you. You also have to have that life experience, to have the patience to let a lot of stuff that's thrown at you in a courtroom by a client, by a defendant or their family, roll off your back. You don't want to spend your whole day just holding people in contempt. You won't get anything done. She will do all of that. And then the last point I want to bring up is she has the writing skills to be a juvenile court judge. A juvenile court judge, and I believe you were nominated for Worcester. Is it Worcester that she's going to do it? Does anyone know what?
I think so, yes.
Okay, so Worcester's got the highest caseload of care and protections in the state. Is that not right?
It's okay.
Okay. So she will be handling a lot of CMPs. A judge going on the bench in Boston, my new judges would come on and be immediately handle a caseload of 100 and then beginning to pick up about 20 to 25 new cases a month. When you write your findings on care and protections, I had this discussion with you the other night, it's 100+ pages for an easy one. So we need people with writing skills. She's got them. I've seen her motions to suppress. I've seen her oral arguments in court. She's going to be precise and deliberative. So I ask each of you, she's also the mother of 2 great kids. So that gives her some sense of patience, I think, and a husband who works very hard. So she's done a lot on her own. Her mother must be very proud of her today to have your daughter here on the cusp of becoming a judge. I would be so proud to have Audrey Murillo serve in the juvenile court. I ask all of you to vote in the positive for her candidacy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Judge. Always a pleasure to have you. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Jacobs has a question.
Sorry.
I just want to, thank you for sending the letter.
You're welcome,
as well as I really appreciated your testimony just now. But there's I just want you to speak to a part of your letter that I didn't hear. I was busy looking for it, so I hope I didn't miss you saying it, but, and now I've lost it again. Okay, no, here it is. She understands the importance of intervention and diversion by both police and district attorneys in identifying juveniles who may benefit from rehabilitation in cases involving lesser offenses. Can you just speak a little?
Sure. So every county in Massachusetts now in the juvenile court, and we have a juvenile court in every single county since the statewide expansion, has a diversion program. And it is important that the judges remain involved in that program. So that means a child who deserves a break that comes into the court can be diverted out of the system out of the system, and a judge has to usually agree to that. The district attorney will ask for the diversion to be set up with certain rules and regulations. And so the practicality of a judge in setting those conditions is really important, because you don't want to set conditions that set up a child to fail. You want to set reasonable, good conditions. She'll do that because I've seen her ask for reasonable and good conditions from representing juvenile offenders before me.
So
Does that answer your question, Counselor? North Adams, right? You're a Westfield State girl.
There you go. Council Devaney.
Counselor Devaney, how are you?
They started before 1 and I left at 2 minutes of 1
We actually started right at 1, but came in a few minutes later, that's fine.
over the last.
No worries. You didn't miss a thing. You didn't miss a thing. You didn't miss a thing.
I just started when you walked in the door.
I'm so sorry.
What's your question, though?
My question is that, tell me what you have observed of this nominee in court. What qualifications, what her temperament, and what do you see that she brings to the court?
And I'll embarrass Audrey a little with this, but I have known her, I think, since her first couple of days in as a lawyer. She was a very young, inexperienced lawyer when I first met her. She had done some work in a firm, but she hadn't been in the pit yet, as I call the trial court. She matured extremely fast. She is articulate, so she doesn't waste my time on the bench by repeating herself too much. Because every lawyer, including myself, would repeat ourselves. And as a judge, I certainly repeated myself. Her quality of written work on her motions to suppress was superb, was absolutely superb. Her patience in the courtroom, a lot of times, and I'm sure those of you that practice know this, particularly Counsel Kennedy, you go to court at 9 o'clock, your case is scheduled for 10, and you're lucky to get in by noontime. That means your client's mad at you.
I don't think it's court.
Clients, parents are mad at you. And at that point, you've got to calm the waters before you walk in the courtroom. She does that superbly. And I think the written ability and the ability to articulate her position in a clear and meaningful way, and not to talk in legalese when she's talking to her clients, and she won't talk in legalese when she's in the courtroom as a judge. I know that for a fact. She's going to talk clear. Anyone in that courtroom is going to understand her decision, is going to understand her conditions, and is going to understand how she got there, reasoning-wise. Does that answer your question?
Tribute to the nominee to have you here. I was there before you retired. I didn't want you to retire.
That was the law, Marilyn. I would have broken.
Tried to change it, but no one's out there doing it. But to thank you, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you. I was saying that you and Chris Ionella are the two councils remaining here, that I was lucky enough to get to vote for me twice. So I thank you again for that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Next, we're going to hear from Professor Delilah Umana. Did I say that right?
No, but
We're going to hear from the professor.
sorry, I prefer actually to stand if that's okay. So good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Professor Delia Umuna. I am a professor of law at Harvard Law School, where over the last 5 years or so, I have had the privilege of working with Audrey Murillo as a colleague. So 8 years ago or so, I was in Dorchester, minding my business, waiting for my case to be called. And then I saw Judge Kaplanis engaging with a young woman who was an attorney. This attorney was fierce. She was eloquent. She was indeed very brave as she skirted around the issue in front of the court. I looked at her with great interest and I thought, that's an impressive advocate. Although the judge was pushing and prodding and pushing and prodding, Ms. Murillo remained calm. Ms. Murillo remained insistent, and above all, she remained very committed to the fact that she was there representing a client. Impressed with what I saw, never heard of her before, I walked up to her afterwards and I introduced myself. And I invited her, because we are always looking for great attorneys, I invited her to Harvard Law School's Trial Advocacy Workshop, which is a 3-week intense workshop where you bring lawyers and judges from all over the country to visit Harvard Law School and train our students in mock trials. Ms. Murillo showed up at my invitation, but what she did know, and what I foisted upon her, was she had to do a demonstration. Now, she had never been to the workshop before, and usually I call upon seasoned folks to do that. And there she was, cross-examining an expert who had been doing it for 20 years. I was so impressed. Afterwards, many people came up to me and they said, who is that person? We've never seen her at TAW before. And I said, she is now officially a member of the Badassery Club, which is, you know, a member of a club where people, especially women, who are fierce, who are smart, intelligent, where they belong. And so it shouldn't surprise anyone that when a position became open in my office to bring her on board as a clinical instructor, I jumped at that position, at that opportunity. I reached out to Audrey and I asked her, and there were so many qualified applicants, as you can imagine, who applied, and we selected her. Over the years, she has proven to be everything that we had hoped for. Smart, kind, fierce, intelligent, well-balanced. And you asked a question about her temperament. Patient, well-reasoning. It is, if you know what it's like to teach at Harvard Law School, I have students who think they know a lot more than I do. They don't. But you have to have a certain type of temperament to be able to engage all of those personalities. And Ms. Murillo, without question, excels at that. She has the absolute temperament to be a judge. I have watched her head up our amicus brief section where she supervises some of our students write amicus briefs to the courts in Massachusetts. She is going to be missed. She's our resident expert on all matters juvenile. She's beloved. I am going to miss her as a friend because I do not know whose office I'm going to go into and rant about parenting and the joys of parenting. And Lola and Joaquin, through whom I live vicariously since my kids are much older than they are. But you have a wonderful mom and a brilliant attorney. And to her writing, I can only say it's exceptional. So I want to close with a few statements from evaluations from her students. I get to see them all since I am the big boss. But here is what some of her students say. She's great, very encouraging and easy to get along with. My supervisor was Audrey Murillo, and she was incredibly patient. Anytime I will have questions, I could email and text her, and her responses were always prompt. She always gave feedback on motions and oral arguments, which allowed me to grow in my advocacy. Fantastic communicator. Audrey is very responsive and does not always mind me when I call a panicked after-hour communications from students. Usually is available by email and text. Audrey is open to more than one meeting per week. She values independence, but not arrogance. And I thought those were telling. And finally, Audrey Murillo is incredible. She strikes the perfect balance between always being there for support and to bounce off ideas while also allowing a student a lot of independence and personal responsibility over a case. So as I said, Ms. Murillo will be missed. As far as I'm concerned, she embodies all of the characteristics of a judge: excellent temperament, high level of intelligence, impeccable integrity, tireless work ethic, and she's a consummate professional. She's not motivated by any desire for fame or fortune. Rather, she's motivated by a sincere desire to be of service to the citizens of the Commonwealth. Without any reservation, I urge you, I encourage you to cast your vote, because our loss is really going to be a gain to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thank you.
Professor.
Thank you.
Michael Kennedy.
Glad I never had a case against you.
I don't want to brag, but I want to say I got into Harvard exactly 3 times. Once to bring my daughter to orientation for the Chan School, and twice more when Judge Spinelli who's presiding in the juvenile court in Bristol County, and I spoke at one of my daughter's classes. And it was one of the best experiences of my life, because we got to speak to wicked smart people around the globe. Probably never met a police chief or a judge before. And when they got to hear from us, like practically like how we did things and how we have evolved over the last 30, 40 years, and how the court treats people, and the wonderful work that you people do. So thank you for inviting us to Harvard. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for making a huge difference in the lives of so many juveniles. I think you guys are like the most important court when it comes down to brass tacks, because you shape the lives of children until they're adults, and nothing could be more important. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Last, we're going to hear from Steve DiFilippo, the owner of Davio's Restaurant. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me. I have to say, I've never followed a judge or a Harvard law professor. So, you know, we're not going to share grades or anything. Okay? Wow. I'm here because I've known Audrey for over 30 years, right? At least. She started at Davio's back, you know, in the early 90s as a server, and she was, let me sit down. This woman has such empathy for people. It's, you know, because she went to college, she would come back for the summers, and then when she graduated, she became one of our managers, and then she went and worked in the office. So she was always the person that everyone would go to. Like they didn't want to talk to me personally. They would go to Audrey, right? And Audrey would call me, Steve, you need to come talk. You know, she was always like the middle person for me back in those days. And it's kind of ironic that we're sitting here and you're going to be a judge, because you've kind of been a judge forever, you know? And, you know, I just think that, you know, to have someone like her who, when you really think about it and you look at her life and you look at, she started, you know, in the restaurant business, and then went on, graduated from UMass. She went to law school here in Boston. Married Rodney, who is from Costa Rica, who started as a dishwasher at Davio's. Now he's our vice president and corporate chef for all 11 Davio's. They have 2 kids. They live in Milton. It's the American dream right here. It's just the American dream is still available in our country. And, you know, her mother's sitting right here. She came from Cambridge, Massachusetts. We're all from Boston here. I mean, it's just an incredible day, you know, and I'm just blessed to be asked to come here and talk about her, because we need people like this on the bench. You know, we need people like this who care, have empathy, who love people, who love kids. You know, when she came out of college, law school, what did she do? She went and helped immigrants become legal. She didn't go and work for some high-powered law firm. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's great. Go work for a law firm. But she wanted to help people, you know. And here she is now, many years later, and she wants to be a judge, you know. And I can't believe you're going to be 50 in January, right?
Thank you for reminding me.
I'm a lot older than that, so I wish I was 50. But I think, you know, I just hope that you vote for her, because I think we need her. And I just want to thank you for having me today. And let's get going. Let's vote.
No. Councilor Kennedy.
Popovas?
Of course.
So I just want to say, Steve, obviously you and I have been friends for a very long time. And one of the things that's always impressed me about your business, it's not from the top down, it's from the bottom up. Your employees are incredibly loyal to you. And I noticed that it's not just a restaurant, an employee-employer relationship, it's a family there. And I've known a lot of your employees over the years. And I know she's part of your family in that respect. And obviously your being here means a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Duff.
Just want to say thank you for having gluten-free food at your.
Thanks. We're hearing about Audrey today. I thank you. But, yeah, can I tell you how it started?
It's always about.
I'm going to tell you a quick story. My daughter, Ella's 25. When she was 10, she got Lyme disease, like 15 years ago. And we went to the doctor, and the doctor said she's got to get gluten out of her diet. Yeah, I wasn't even sure what gluten was, you know, at the time. I'm a chef, but I'm joking. And we did. And so then she came to Davio's, like, I don't know, a few weeks later, and we had like one thing. Rodney, I can tell you, we really were, I was like, guys, we need to change, you know, and that's kind of all started. Now we have probably the most gluten-free menu in the country.
Thank
Well, thank you.
Council Iannella.
No questions. I've known Steve for, it's great to see you here today. You and Max mean a great deal to me. And again, it's always a pleasure to see you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And, you know, this is really important. This is like probably the most important thing ever today.
I give you credit. We've never met before. I have been to your restaurants. They've been outstanding. The wine is really good. Congratulations for hiring well. You know, the most successful people I know are those that surround themselves with good people in all aspects of life. And congratulations for hiring well.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. It did start early, just so you know. They started early.
All right, next we're going to hear from anyone else in favor.
Just say that to you.
Steve, you're dismissed. Anyone else in favor of the nominee? Anyone else in favor? Anyone opposed to the nominee? Want to sit down again, Steve? Oh. You're dismissed. Thank you. So next we're gonna hear from the nominee. It's your floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Governor's Council. I am humbled to be in front of you today as a nominee for Associate Justice at the Juvenile Court. I'm grateful to all of you for your time this week, over the phone, in person, and I'm grateful for the robust conversations that we've had. I first want to thank my witnesses, Professor Delia Muna, the Honorable Terry Craven, and Steve DiPaolo. Their kind words mean more to me than they will ever know. I know they all had to clear their very busy schedules, and I'm so appreciative. I want to thank Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll for the nomination and the enormous trust that they've placed in me in nominating me to serve in the court that protects the safety of Massachusetts' most vulnerable population, children. I also want to thank the governor's legal team, Paige Scott Reed and Derek Kesselheim, for their support and encouragement in this process, and Valerie McCarthy for all of her help. I sit before you humbled by finding myself in this chamber. My journey here has been shaped in part by some childhood challenges. At 4 years old, my parents divorced, leaving me and my 2-year-old brother in the care of our hardworking mother during the week and on weekends with our dad. Until I was about 10 years old, we lived paycheck to paycheck in a rent-controlled apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We lived there until the apartment was converted into condominiums, and we were forced to move, exacerbating financial strain. Despite working as hard as she could, my mother could not afford the rent, and we were frequently deprived of basic necessities. We were left alone probably more than we should have been, which placed some strain on our family. Despite being poor with a capital P, my mother put on her high heels each morning to walk to the T to go to her full-time job. She did not believe in wearing sneakers with skirts. At the age of 13, I got my first job and learned how to work hard. I've worked hard ever since. I am grateful to my mother. She instilled in me the ethos of perseverance when life throws you a curveball. And though she was poor, she always made time to be charitable, and for my entire life has volunteered her time to those less fortunate than her. I'm grateful to my father for his brilliant sense of humor. He taught us how to cope with hardship with humor. And I'd like to think I also have a sense of humor that I got from him. I will never forget where I came from and do not take for granted any of the opportunities I've been so fortunate to have with the help of caring adults along the way, one of whom is in the room, Marie Manduca. Let's see, where am I? As you've heard, I worked at Davio's restaurant after getting my undergraduate degree. It was until it was time to pursue my dream of going to law school. I did so with Steve's blessing and encouragement, remained a constant in my life. It was at Davio's that I met Rodney Murillo, my husband and the most considerate person I know. And Rodney and I could not be more proud of our beautiful children, Joaquin and Lola Murillo. We are those parents who remind our kids daily ad nauseum about how lucky they are and how tough we had it. As for my 17-year legal career, I'm fortunate to have spent the majority of it in the juvenile court. I knew I wanted to work with children since law school. I was drawn to the discipline, believing and hoping I could make an impact. I understood the fragility of childhood and the pivotal role adults played in my life, and I wanted to be one of those adults. For over a decade, I practiced delinquency and youthful defender defense, eventually becoming the supervisor for the private juvenile bar in Suffolk County. In that role, I mentored and evaluated attorneys practicing in the juvenile court and liaised with court staff to address their concerns and ensure the availability of attorneys when needed. Presently at law school, I oversee third-year law students for their forays into the juvenile and adult court. With both the students and attorneys whom I mentor, I do not always have all the answers, nor do I pretend to. But I have the aptitude, research skills, and legal support network to draw from to find the answers, a practice I would continue if confirmed. If confirmed as a juvenile court associate justice, I will continue to strive to make an impact on children's lives. I will seek to protect them from abuse and neglect and work to rehabilitate young people so that the public is safer for it. Thank you for your time. I ask for your confirmation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, thank you. That was a great summation of very difficult life and how you made it. And I want to let you know, I interviewed both your children earlier, and they said they would call you around at home, and they think I should vote for you. So you've done a good job.
Very much.
Councilor Devaney.
Council, could the nominee introduce all these great people?
She did. She did.
Must have dozed off then, okay. Congratulations. Please don't laugh, Councilor Duff.
Go ahead, please.
And anyway, I really appreciate the time that you took coming out to see me. I was impressed with your background and how you've come. And I think that, to me, when someone comes before you, you can identify with them, you know, because from your background. So tell me, how did you decide to go into juvenile law? What was the?
Yeah, I think I was, you know, if I were really to get analytical, I think it's probably because of my childhood. I felt compelled to work with young people. I had these adults in my life that made differences in my life, and I thought I could use my experiences to make an impact on young people. And so 2 years after becoming an attorney, I began working in the court, and I've stayed there ever since.
Yeah, I was really interested in your the case that you. It was a motion to suppress evidence, and it was obtained without with search and seizure without. What did you say rather than me talk about?
I think that my writing sample that I provided was a motion to suppress. It was a memorandum for a motion to suppress. It was an interesting case where the person that called 911 described perfectly in detail the person that reported my client with the gun, and they described what he was wearing, what his backpack looked like, and the police arrived on the scene and they frisked my client. And the point I made with the help of the case law to the court was, you know, I could describe Counselor Kennedy's jacket and tie perfectly and say he just left the State House and he has a gun. But is that enough for the police to frisk him without a warrant? And so that was the point I made to the.
It's enough. Again, it's enough.
The juvenile court is really overworked. Don't have enough attorneys. Don't have enough representation for people. How do you feel about increasing the age? This juvenile court.
So first of all, that wouldn't be my job, but I I can see both sides. It's the job of the legislature, as you know, that, and there is pending legislation presently to increase the age to 19. What I can say is, and what's more important to me, and not more important than the brain science or although that's important, is the preservation of records. So in that sense, I am in favor of raising the age. I'm aware that the court is pretty overwhelmed right now, and I know that resources would be an issue, and that's why I would I would defer to the legislature if they decide to do so.
Now, with your experience, what kind of changes would you like to see in the juvenile court?
Yeah, let's see here. Thank you for that question. So what I can say, since practicing, there have been a lot of changes for the better. And I think that the more the judges and the attorneys have become more aware of the data, of the science, like I mentioned, of the benefits of diversion. Since 2018, we've had statutory diversion as well. And so I think that the court and its level of consciousness around children has been raised quite a bit since I've started practicing. Areas where it could be improved, I think it's, there's often a strain on services. And again, I've seen services that you can send kids to through diversion programs or through probation, connecting a young person with services. I know in Western Mass, there aren't as many nonprofit organizations as there are here in Boston. And I'd like to see more resources to divert kids away from the court, or to send the kids to that come before the court.
Well, as when we met, I told you that for me, the greatest experience that I ever had in my life, I volunteered for a year with juveniles on probation. And I have to say, being married, having 4 children, I lived a different life, and you have a different expectation of thoughts about who are these juveniles on probation. And that was the best thing that I ever did, because I found out the other side. Found out a 15-year-old, and I would meet with them alone, take them for breakfast or lunch or whatever, and it took a long time to trust. So I can imagine it was the same with you. And when I heard the stories, they were heartbreaking. 15-year-old girl, mother's a prostitute, doesn't know the father, and she locks her in her room while she goes out. That's the thing. I mean, I learned a lot from that. But, you know, I don't go with a book that's saying that the brain isn't developed till it's 25. My husband was 21. Okay, I had my 4 children by the time I was 25, and my brain is intact. I wanted those children. So I really think sometimes we go by book learning instead of life experience. And so, but what I'm upset now is, and you see it, there's an increase in juveniles in criminal activities. Now, is it because of drugs, or what would you say is increasing this?
I think that I think overall juvenile crime is down, and that's been a trend. I think that cases that make the news or might be more sensational might be the result of, it might be leftover ramifications from the pandemic. Not being in school, not having the structure, not having a lot of these nonprofits that I was mentioning closed, and kids had been really clinging to them for structure, for activities to do after school, and they're coming back slowly but surely. But I think it might be a byproduct of COVID.
So what other things can we do for juveniles? What would you like to say?
I envision a world where there's more avenues for diverting kids from the court system, so they never come into the court system. I think that contact with the court system statistically is shown to increase contact with the court system. So getting to the kids that need the assistance before a civil case is filed or before a delinquency case is filed, I think would help with the court overall.
And you've seen so many. What was the most rewarding outcome representing a juvenile?
There's one case that I think we spoke about when we met, which was lovely. And meeting you, not my case. There's one case that sticks out in my mind because I represented a 13-year-old young boy, and he was accused of armed robbery, and the victim in the case, and I say victim because he was a victim in the case, was also 13. And both young boys took the stand, and I was struck by how brave those boys were. And I knew that my client his identity had been mistaken. The young boy that was the victim was indeed robbed via armed robbery, but it was not by my client. And the pressure was palpable. For me, I kept looking around thinking that somebody was going to call a timeout because I was so confident that my client had not done it. But I went through the process. I proved my client's innocence in that situation. And that case was rewarding and memorable.
Well, we certainly haven't won the war on drugs, have we? Do you think that some of the crimes, it's increasing because of drugs?
What I can say to that is I see substance abuse disorder affecting a lot of my adult clients. I don't see it as much in the juvenile world, but it's there and it's a real problem. And I think that treatment and services and ways to rehabilitate are preferable than punitive.
We certainly had 3 witnesses, and they know you, and it means a lot to me. They know you personally. I chaired the hearing before, and I got out like 9 minutes of 1, so I had to run downstairs. And so I just want to say that, you know, I really appreciate the time that you gave me. I think for your age, I look at your life experience. So you've lived through that life that these juveniles are coming before you, so you know. So you are a role model for them, that what they can do with their life, what you have done. And I really admire you. And to have, you know, this wonderful former judge to come and, you know, to talk to you and your witnesses. And I really appreciate it. And I thank you for all your time. And I'm very pleased that you applied. You did apply before. I'm going to ask you, did you think you were ready? Think you're a little young then? Let me put it this way. What have you learned since that time?
I think I'm always a work in progress and learning. I think I thought at the time I was ready, and knowing myself, I think even if I wasn't, I would have made sure I was ready. But I think that now I feel.
Well, I'm very pleased. I really am. So when you're going through, you know, hard times, did you ever think someday I'd like to be a judge? Did it come to your mind? That's amazing.
Yeah. I don't think I thought that when I was a little girl, but I did feel it was important to do something meaningful with my life. I've always felt that way.
Well, good. Did it.
You know,
And it was really a pleasure to meet you.
pleasure to meet you.
Thanks, Counselor. I'm Lionella.
Thank you very much. Now, I read 90% of your cases are in state court. Now, does that mean all in the juvenile court, or some of the district courts, some of the superior court? What's the breakdown?
So I've had cases in all of courts. I've always maintained a presence in the juvenile court. I've never left it, but I have practiced in district court and in superior court.
And most of the cases in the juvenile court, are they private clients or are they court appointed?
At the time that I was practicing there, they were court appointed cases.
And
Most.
I should have asked the judge there, of most lawyers who practice in the juvenile court, and most of those cases that these lawyers get, are they court appointed? I know people, there are going to be some private clients, but most.
I would say the majority are court appointed, especially with kids, because they're deemed indigent.
What's the most difficult cases that you envision in the juvenile court?
Like Judge Craven had mentioned, the juvenile court judges have the same sentencing authority, except for murder, as the superior court. So there's shootings, short of murder, everything is in the juvenile court.
Well, what about, again, I don't think maybe watching, maybe one, I don't know. What about removing kids from their parents? To me, would be like, oh,
And-
would be the most challenging.
And I think that, to the extent that I implied that that wasn't the most challenging, I agree that being vested with the authority to remove a child from his family it probably weighs the most on a juvenile court.
And what happens? You have like an investigator or a court, you have a lawyer, but who talks to the family? Somebody's appointed, or how's that?
Right, so the child has an attorney to represent them, the parents have attorneys to represent them, there's an investigator.
Oh, they both parents.
It depends on their position, right. So everybody is represented, and there's an investigator on the case. And then oftentimes a court evaluation where the doctors specific to juvenile court will evaluate the situation.
If a judge removed a child to a foster home, is it drugs, is it alcohol, is it abuse, is there one thing that's more than something else?
I think each case you have to evaluate on a case by case basis. Serious abuse it can be, a cause for removal. The goal is reunification with the family, but there are times when a judge must remove a kid from the home.
No, I get that. When you say, I'm just curious, like, I know abuse, it can be physical, it can be emotional. Like, what's most of them like that? Is it physical, they beat up the kid, or emotional? I know every case is different, but I'm just trying to get a sense just for myself, like, what are most of these cases?
I mean, I think when the word abuse is used, it means physical abuse.
And at some point, if you send a child or children to a foster home, say there's more than one child, do they generally, I know it's different, do they generally go to the same foster home, or they go to different? One child goes here, one goes here, how does that work?
I think the preference is to keep siblings together and to maintain, have them stay in one place as long as possible. I don't know that always happens, but that is better for the child.
I think so. And once someone goes to a foster home, a child, what is the role of the biological parents? Can they ever see the kids? How does that work?
And again, each case is nuanced.
Most people who watch it have no idea.
Yeah.
These are private kids, these are private. I can't go into juvenile.
Right, and the Department of Children's Families, their mission is to reunify. So that is their priority. And so, yes, parents can visit. parents can work towards, the judge can, and in conjunction with DCF can work on a plan to ensure the safety of the children so that they can be reunified.
And it's ever happened where the biological parents can, say, take the kids or children, even one child, back to the home for a couple of days? I can't do that.
That can happen. It depends on the case.
And does it ever happen, or frequently happen,
What?
the father parents adopt the children? Oh, that never happens. So
That does happen.
is that going to part of you? That's another.
Yes.
And this is more knowledge too, you're very,
Yeah.
just okay, I'm almost done. And obviously it's easier if the biological parents don't object about the adoption. Is it frequent? It's really contentious to hearing with the biological opposed to the adoption, or that almost never happens.
I think that it's fair to say that most biological parents object to termination of their parental rights, but there's so many different ways that.
It's so difficult.
Yeah.
You have 2 kids, you can only imagine.
It's true.
That'd be such a top. I don't have any questions. I'm impressed right from the start. Your parents, your mother's here today. What a work ethic right from the start. You did a great job. You did a great job. She's a superstar, but she probably wouldn't be as much as a superstar if it weren't for at least you, because at least I'm meeting you tonight. And I want to applaud you for the work that you did. You're an outstanding parent. I mean, it's not easy, and you did a great job with her. Good to see Judge Craven, the professor, my friend Steve DiFilippo, everyone else here. I was gonna ask one more question. Your husband gonna take you out to dinner when you go down. As I told you, Councilor Kennedy, big supporter of you as soon as your name came before the council. He called me. Yeah, you're gonna be a great addition to the juvenile court. I look forward to supporting you next week.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So Duff,
Thank you very much. Love speaking with you. Really had a great conversation. Thanks so much for your time. We all meet with everybody and have in-depth conversations. And so, and each of us comes to the council with different, life experiences and backgrounds. As I told you, I think Councilor DiPaolo is really more the expert on this court than anyone else in this chamber. Although I'm always open to learning. That said, one of the things we spoke about, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about it as you wish today, is young folks you see in your court right now as an attorney, but perhaps as a judge, who are members of the LGBTQ community, in the unique challenges and situations that they face and why you would. And I can expound on that more if you find it helpful, but what is, tell me a little bit about your experience with that community.
Yeah, so what I will say about the juvenile court as compared to other courts that I've worked in is that it's more evolved and informed than the other courts. Having said that, it could go further. Yeah, we all can, and we're all learning. And so there's a recognition of LGBTQ rights and kids and how kids identify, and the Department of Youth Services does a really, does a good job of placing young individuals in the gender that they identify as. DCF has regulations it follows, and the judges, even the oldest of them, have gotten better at using pronouns and asking which pronouns the juveniles before them prefer. And so I think the court could continue to be educated and informed. And there's a very long way to go in that sense. The kids might come to the juvenile court having been isolated or alienated or abused by parents because of their gender identity or their sexuality. So it's something that we're confronted with, and we need to continue to stay on top of the research and make sure that we understand and check our own biases as those in authority positions.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's, one of the things that concerns me is we see these kids and they end up in court, kids in this community, because some of them feel safer living on the street than they do in their own home or in foster care, which is like a whole nother level of problematic dysfunction, right? But it's real. And once that happens, we often see them fall into the criminal justice system. It can be through prostitution, it can be through drugs, it can be through theft, it can be through a combination of a myriad of things. But I find this particular population at such risk because the issues are so compounded why they're there in the first place. And and I do think, to your point, I think our courts have done a really great job of educating and self-educating and becoming more aware, because a lot of this stuff is really hard to get your head around. Right. No matter how liberal or progressive you are or whatever, a lot of this is really tough stuff. But at the end of the day, it's real. Right? And we're the adults and they're the kids. And our job is to protect them. I always say, I don't have children. I don't have any birth children, but they're all my kids, right? I'm responsible for every single one of those children in that juvenile court as an officer of the court, because I sit on this council. My responsibility is higher, and it should be. I should be held to a higher standard to make sure when I'm here questioning you, because you might become a judge, I should be held to a higher standard of accountability. I really, truly believe that. And some of the things that concern me is that we see, and it's not spoken about, so that's why I speak about it, elevated levels of in this community. Epidemics of birth, of young lesbians becoming pregnant or bisexual, whatever they identify as, having children out of wedlock. Not that wedlock matters, but you know what I'm saying? It's like they're having kids, right? And they're not prepared to have kids. They haven't thought about it. They're getting pregnant because they're not having safe sex. They're getting disease because they're not having safe sex. And so that goes into a whole other level of not just committing crimes or whatever. But I find it incumbent, and I appreciated the conversation I had with you on this, is that we are not, we all want to be compassionate and empathetic or sympathetic, but really understanding the complexity of some of these issues, because the fallout of them is so much. It's not just the immediate, it's a 5-level thing. And for you to do the work you do, thank you so much. I don't know that I could do it as long as you did. It's really, really hard work. And I do think your understanding of the juvenile brain is important, because we know from science, and science is real, that the brain is not fully formed until the age of 25, right? It doesn't mean you can't have sex and have kids before that, but it does mean that the full maturity of your brain isn't really always there. Maybe for some people it is, but we've seen the scope of it. So for me, knowing that you really grasp that, plus your lived experience, is critical for someone to be on as a judge in this court, because you can really change the trajectory of somebody's life, but you can also give them that gleam of hope that they might need. But you never know that day, especially in court, that day that you're saving somebody's life figuratively, literally, especially with these kids. So I don't need to go on about this. You and I had a really, really great long visit. And I appreciate your time. I appreciate your dedication to these kids and to this particular court and field. Like I said, it's very, very hard work, very, very hard work. I do my best to educate myself to understand, but it is like, there's so much. And it's constantly changing. And that's why I said I defer to Councilor Paolo on a lot of this, because he really, I believe, has the expertise more than anyone else in this chamber on that. But thank you for your application. Thank you for your answers. And thank you for listening to my recent diatribe.
Thank you, Councilor DiPaolo.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, Counselor Duff. You're gonna make me, I have to look smart now. Like I know it.
Try too hard. It's getting late.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for the work you do. It came up earlier. I know you applied in 2019 for a juvenile position. I don't know the exact timing. I know in Worcester we had a vacancy at that time that remained open for years after. So thank you for reapplying. And I want to thank the governor and her administration and her legal counsel team for, we're still early in the judicial nominations rolling out, but I'm very grateful that juvenile court has had a priority because it is so important. Being in this role, trying to find qualified people to serve on the juvenile bench, there's a challenge there. And we have a thin bar, I guess is the way I would put it. And I know that in your application, it was mentioned that you were working on an event that would encourage young listeners. Is that right? What do you think? Why do we have a challenge? And I know the answers, but why do you think we have a challenge expanding the juvenile bar?
Yeah, so I had worked with the Chief Justice of the Juvenile Court to put on an event. It was held at Suffolk Law School, but it was broadcast to all the other area law schools. And the event was to attract lawyers to the civil side of the juvenile court, though both sides are experiencing a shortage of attorneys.
Experienced.
Sorry?
I apologize for interrupting. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Experienced.
Exactly, because it really is a specialized court. And, I think part of it, all fields of, all disciplines right now are experiencing these shortages, but particularly the juvenile court. And the juvenile court before the pandemic, especially in Western Massachusetts, had a real hardship of the child welfare attorneys, a lack thereof. And they did everything from raising the rates to getting people to drive long distances. I think people don't understand it, and I don't think it gets enough. It needs a PR makeover, because when you go to law school, and for those of us that have, you hear about juvenile law mostly in the criminal realm, and you don't hear about the important work and the rewarding work of working with children on the civil side. So I think that there's been a lack of awareness around it. I think a lot of people think it's too emotionally charged and that they might not be able to handle it. But the attorneys that do work, especially on the child welfare side, find it's so incredibly rewarding. And I mean, what other job do you have where you can make a difference in a child's life, or get paid to go play basketball with them? And so it's unfortunate. I hope that we can get the word out, but
I appreciate that we all come with our own stories and experiences.
Right.
I speculate that a lot of my law school peers had very comfortable upbringings and were never exposed to what many of the children who appear in juvenile court for whatever reason have gone through, and the room there is to help and make a difference in that area. And I know that, the legislature did add one juvenile seat in Worcester in the last few years. But of course, we do need more resources. I think it's the best place to invest because it's going to pay off the most in the long term. The Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. Was there any best practices to come out of your experience there, or promising practices maybe that haven't been implemented yet?
So there was an initiative within the initiative that I was a part of, and that was DYS was trying to find a way where they could divert kids sent to DYS. So they'd be held at DYS pre-commitment, and they were trying to get wraparound services in place and get the support of the court for them to divert the kids also. So it was a diversion.
But how challenging is that? Is that practical right now with the resources we have?
It's challenging because of the amount of resources.
I have a particular concern that I'm going to raise, and I could raise it all over the state about any number of things. But just focusing for a moment on our second biggest city, Worcester. So in Worcester Public Schools, the children in foster care have astronomical dropout rates. I mean, like crazy dropout rates. And, having worked in education and with kids, court-involved youth, I know that like catching these kids and we're not going to turn them into Rhodes Scholars off the bat, but catching these kids and keeping them in school and seeing them through graduation isn't actually that monumental a task if we have people who are taking accountability to monitor the children. And there's all these different stakeholders. The school districts need to step up, the departments are involved, and of course the courts are involved. And I'm wondering, is there any room for the courts, strike that, is there anything you're seeing in the courts already? Or is there any room for the courts to be taking an active role in trying to piece together some level of accountability on someone's shoulders for tracking the kids, and seeing them through that process?
Yeah, so first off, I agree that needs to be done because like those stakeholders that you mentioned need to talk to each other and someone needs to take accountability because the kids slip through the cracks otherwise. Sure. So DCF might back off, DYS is, housing the kids. So, but I've seen the court come along in terms of agreeing with this idea that the stakeholders need to talk to each other. And I do see that the First Justices doing just that. I know First Justice Terry Craven did that, and the current First Justice in Suffolk County. And the school to prison pipeline is real. And early.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that if, for example, if a kid is kicked out of school, and there aren't, the odds go up, of them becoming court involved. And I think that.
Could I interject for one thing? So like in the schools, we know LGBTQ youth are facing increased disciplinary actions. We know when we look at statistics that minority students are. And I love that expression, school to prison pipeline, I used it on the campaign trail. But I think of it a lot in terms of trauma to prison pipeline, as far as the trauma that's happening even before school, but including at school, where oftentimes it's exacerbated. I know that it's come up, one of your first questions you were asked, and I'll frame it a little different. If you were in the legislature, would you support expanding the age of juvenile jurisdiction? And I'm wondering, around brain development and what Councilor Duff said, is how does childhood trauma impact things as far as development? And how does childhood trauma impact your jurisprudence or your approach to serving on the bench?
So I think that the brain is evolving, that we've discussed a lot today, until the age of 21, and my kids know that all too well too, because I tell them that. But trauma can slow the process down even more. And so trauma-informed questions of the litigants, I think, is important for the judges to learn what that is.
Can I pause you again?
Yes.
So you gave, at one point, you administered the training that I believe every attorney who joins the panel has. It's called something like what every juvenile defender should know. Is that, I'm close enough on that? What should every juvenile defender know?
Well, and that training, if we were to run it today, would even have more about trauma. And also, attorneys need to understand that judges are receptive to hearing about trauma. So, even when the Miller case came down and the cases in Massachusetts that followed it, took a while for the judges to come on board and come around to it, and the attorneys to come on board. And I think that the same goes for trauma. So the more we know about trauma, the more attorneys will use it in their advocacy, the more the judges will hear it and become more informed, and how that plays out, whether that's a mitigating circumstance. But I think that trauma is.
Is there a trauma-informed approach to the courtroom that you take as a judge?
I think it depends. As an advocate, when you asked that question, I thought of a client that I asked the judge if they wouldn't mind coming to, we have these little side rooms right out of the courtroom, coming in there to talk to have the hearing in that side room. And I explained why, and that was based on the trauma of that particular child. And I think that there's a lot of room in the juvenile court for accommodations, and you have to present it to the judge. And the judge has to have an awareness of that it's a real thing, and hopefully act accordingly.
Yeah, I was glad to hear one of your witnesses talk about contempt in the courtroom, because I do think about that a lot in the juvenile court, in those rare cases when a juvenile is held in contempt. And oftentimes someone like me might consider it problematic and lacking trauma-informed approach. So just last thing I'll say. So we haven't talked about CRAs really yet. And I know how many wonderful people we have in the system, and I know how hard we work and with the resources we have, but I'm concerned about the ones that don't go perfect, because we're striving to perfect the system, even though we'll never get there. So have you ever seen have you ever seen conditions placed on a child requiring assistance that you feel are counterproductive or not tailored to are likely to result in violations of said conditions?
Yeah, I've seen conditions in CRAs and in the delinquency session that can have the opposite of effect that the judge intended. A setup to fail, if you will, not tailored enough to the individual's child's needs. And as an advocate, I think if confirmed with the judge, what I do if a program or a condition is not working is try to supplement it or change it or ask that it be removed. And I think that as a judge, if you see that a condition not having its full effect, you should take notice and wonder why.
Can I throw out a hypothetical lacking any context? So a child flees a group home. And they claim that it's because they were fearing for their safety because of another child in the group home. And I mean, how does one approach that? So the child comes before you for their hearing. This is part of the report. I mean, how do you approach that? Does that warrant escalating consequences one way or another? What does that warrant to you?
So, if first of all, I want to investigate what's going on at the group home, and you can do that a few different ways: through investigation, through bringing the DCF, the person that works at that group home in, because I happen to have the experience of knowing that these things happen at group homes, and I've represented that we proved through video was assaulted at a group home. So it doesn't always happen, and kids can make excuses sometimes, but that wouldn't be ignored by me if I had that in front of me. And I think there's ways to get to the bottom of that. So an immediate consequence for the kid would be a depend situation. It would depend, but that hypothetical sounds like a common thing that happens.
Time to wrap up.
Thank you, Counselor. I'll ask no further questions then. Thank you for your time.
Counselor Jacob.
Thank you. Welcome. We had a robust conversation. I appreciate you coming out to North Adams to meet with me. and we talked about a lot of things. We started from a place of, I had not yet visited juvenile court, and I asked you basically to give me juvenile court 101 education, and you did, and I appreciate it so much. I had the opportunity this week to go visit the Springfield Juvenile Court and observe and meet with the judges and build on everything that you had shared and educated me on. One of the things we talked about at length that impressed me was the work you've done around racial bias and other biases. And I appreciate how much you've done, and it really does seem like you've availed yourself of so many different resources and continue to do that work. And I don't often hear someone talk about bias work to the degree that you have. Having said that, I welcome an invitation to come to the Harvard trainings on bias, so just pass that word along. Hello. But having said that, as a judge, and recognizing the implicit bias in our system, some things that are just systemically occurring before a juvenile comes through the system to the court, what, if anything, can a judge in the juvenile court do to affect any kind of change when racial biases are at play?
Thank you for the question. I think that first and foremost, a judge should do the work themselves and educate themselves and stay abreast of new information, including the data. I know from the data that children of color, Black and brown children, are overrepresented at every stage of the criminal justice system. And that awareness should inform my decision making. I know that kids of color are given harsher sentences than their white counterparts. I think it's 5 times. So me knowing that, my colleagues knowing that, as a judge, if I were to be so fortunate, is a starting point. And then when making decisions, do the work to make sure that my personal bias isn't affecting the decision. And I believe that we all have biases, and implicit, explicit, and making sure that I'm not looking at the situation through my lens is how I would approach the situation.
So I appreciate that. And we also talked a lot about cultural competency, which is sort of a corollary, complementary area of interest. What do you think you can do to increase cultural competency in the juvenile court, if anything?
I think that cultural competence is important for all judges, especially judges that are presiding in courts where the young people before them are, might not be the same race as the judge, and it's often the judge is white and the children before them are Black and brown, or children of color, and
language barriers.
And language barriers. And I think that, I think I gave you an example when we talked about cultural competence. It came from, I keep looking back to see if Delia's here, but I think she had to go teach class. But her client, young client, and this has happened to me, and I have a few examples as well, but brought their child to court. And the judge said to the client, that was her choice doing that. And I think that's an example of a judge maybe not having maybe not having an awareness that for some parents, childcare is not an option. It's too expensive, or the daycare fell through. And so I would strive to have that radar on and make sure I'm not making these sweeping judgments. And I think that all judges in all the courts could continue to make sure that their consciousness is raised.
No, I appreciate that. Actually, that leads into, I wasn't necessarily even going to talk about this, but this is more a comment. I just want to make sort of a blanket comment based on both our conversations, but even more so having visited the Springfield Juvenile Court recently. Apparently back in the day, there was daycare facilities in these courts. And both from the standpoint of community members, clients or not clients, defendants or what have you, people who have to come to court and don't necessarily have childcare, and having young babies, toddlers to tend to while trying to participate and advocate for justice for themselves and for their family members might be, detracted from the needs of their kids, but also talking to the clerical staff in the juvenile court, the number of people, the pay is not very high and childcare costs are very high, and the impediment to retention of staff because of the challenges around childcare could be so much benefited by having facilities in our courts. I think juvenile court is one, but I also think probate and housing are also ones where it was very clear to me how much of an issue it is. None of that is a question for you, but just a commentary that I do think it's an area that's lacking in our justice system, and in terms of things like access to justice is such an issue, and I'm sure requires legislative intervention to bring on that kind of a resource. But I think it's so important to highlight that need and, if possible, find a solution around it. Having said that, I just want to underscore how much I appreciated our conversation, how impressed with you and your resume, your experience, but just who you are as a human and the lived experience that you've had, how much I value who you are and what you bring. And I very much appreciated hearing the witnesses you brought today and what they had to say as an addition. So all that to say, I'm wrapping up and don't need any further time, but thank you.
Yeah.
Now it's my turn.
It's your turn.
I think the most important thing is that the judge have a calm demeanor, that they never lose their temper. With that, I have one important question for your kids. Your mother ever yell at your father? You're not telling the truth. No, you make great. You have great witnesses. You have great witnesses here. You got a great resume. You're going to be a great juvenile court judge. And as my friend, ex-counselor Jude used to say, when Ray Emmer was in the room supporting someone, they always get through. So,
Yeah.